Have you ever noticed that split second before you make a decision when something inside you already knows the answer? Right now, think about the last time you walked into a room and instantly felt the tension hanging in the air. Your rational mind hadn't processed anything yet, but your body had already responded. Your shoulders tensed, your breathing shifted, and somewhere deep in your chest, you felt it, that knowing. Most of you just nodded, because you felt this before. You've experienced that moment when your entire being responds to something your conscious mind hasn't even registered yet. This isn't random. This isn't coincidence. This is your psyche trying to tell you something profound about a capacity you've been trained to ignore. But here's what happened next in that room. Your analytical mind kicked in and started explaining away what you felt. I'm just tired, you told yourself. I'm being too sensitive. I'm reading too much into things. Sound familiar? That in your head that immediately dismisses what your body already knows. That's not wisdom. That's conditioning. You've been taught to apologize for knowing things you can't explain. You've learned to trust everything except yourself. And right now, as I'm speaking these words, notice how your body responds. Notice that slight shift in your breathing, that recognition in your chest. Your unconscious mind is saying, finally, someone sees this. The world taught you to trust everything except yourself. Your education system rewarded analytical thinking and logical reasoning while completely ignoring the intelligence of your body, your emotions, your sudden knowings. Your family might have told you to stop being so sensitive or think rationally when you expressed those gut feelings about people or situations. Your workplace demands facts, figures, and logical explanations while dismissing hunches and intuitive insights as unprofessional. And so you learn to silence that. You learn to override the signals from your body. You developed the habit of second-guessing yourself until that inner knowing became nothing more than a whisper you could barely hear. But Carl Jung understood something that changes everything. He recognized that intuition isn't mystical, it's psychological. It's not some supernatural gift reserved for psychics and mystics. It's a fundamental psychological function that every human being possesses. It's one of the four primary ways your mind processes reality, alongside thinking, feeling, and sensation, and you've been systematically trained to ignore it. Think about this for a moment. When you meet someone new, what happens in the first few seconds, before they've said more than a few words, before you know anything about their background or credentials? Something in you responds. You either feel drawn to them or slightly uncomfortable. You sense whether they're genuine or putting on a show. You pick up on their energy, their authenticity, their hidden emotions. How do you know these things? How can you possibly know whether someone is trustworthy in the first 30 seconds of meeting them? Your unconscious mind is processing thousands of micro-signals that your conscious awareness can't track. Body language, tone of, facial expressions, energy patterns, unconscious emotional states. All of this information is being absorbed and analyzed by parts of your mind that operate far below the threshold of conscious awareness. And then in that moment of knowing, your unconscious mind communicates its findings to your conscious awareness through what we call intuition. Jung called this the personal unconscious, the vast repository of your own experiences, memories, and learned patterns that operates outside your conscious awareness. But he also identified something even more profound, the collective unconscious. This is the deeper layer of unconscious material that connects you to universal human patterns, archetypal energies, and the accumulated wisdom of our species. When you just know something about someone you've never met before, when you sense the mood of a room before anyone speaks, when you feel inexplicably drawn to or repelled by certain places or people, This is your personal and collective unconscious working together to provide you with information that your rational mind could never access on its own. Your unconscious mind always knows. It knows when someone is lying, even when they're convincing. It knows when you're in the wrong relationship, even when everything looks perfect on paper. It knows when a decision is wrong for you, even when it makes logical sense. It knows when danger is present, even when everything appears safe. And it's been trying to tell you these things your entire life. But you've been trained to dismiss these knowings as imagination, wishful thinking, or emotional overreaction. You've learned to create elaborate rational explanations for decisions that your unconscious mind already knew were right or wrong. You've convinced yourself that you need more information, more time, more analysis, when the truth is that the deepest part of you already knows what needs to happen. Notice how your body responds when I say this. Notice if there's a part of you that feels relief, recognition, or validation. That's your unconscious mind saying, yes, this is true. I've been trying to tell you this. The cost of ignoring this inner wisdom is enormous. When you override your gut feelings about people, you end up in relationships that drain your energy or situations that compromise your values. When you dismiss your body's signals about what's healthy for you, you end up exhausted, anxious, or physically ill. When you ignore your intuitive sense of timing, you find yourself pushing against the natural flow of events, creating unnecessary struggle and resistance. Your body keeps score of every time you've ignored its wisdom, that chronic tension in your shoulders. That might be your body holding the stress of decisions you made against your better judgment. That persistent anxiety. It could be your unconscious mind's way of saying you're living out of alignment with your deeper truth. That feeling of being lost or disconnected. That's what happens when you cut yourself off from your primary navigation system. Jung understood that modern culture has created what he called a psychological imbalance. We've developed our thinking function to extraordinary levels while neglecting our feeling, sensation, and intuitive functions. We can analyze, categorize, and rationalize almost anything, but we've lost touch with our ability to simply know things directly, to feel our way through life, to trust our body's wisdom. This imbalance doesn't just affect individual people, it affects our entire culture. We've created systems and institutions that value only what can be measured, quantified, and logically explained. We've built a world that dismisses the wisdom of the body, the intelligence of emotions, and the guidance of intuitive knowing. And then we wonder why so many people feel disconnected, anxious, and lost.
But here's what Jung also understood. This imbalance isn't permanent. It's not a character flaw or a limitation of human nature. It's a cultural conditioning that can be recognized, understood, and transformed. You can reclaim your intuitive capacity. You can learn to trust your body's wisdom again. You can develop the ability to hold both rational analysis and intuitive knowing in conscious awareness. The first step is recognition. You need to become conscious of how intuition actually works in your life. It's not dramatic or mystical. It's subtle, natural, and happening all the time. It's the way you know to call a friend just when they need to hear from you. It's how you sense when your child is troubled, even when they seem fine. It's that feeling you get when you walk into a house and know immediately whether it feels like home. Your intuition speaks through your body. That tightness in your chest when someone is lying to you. That expansion in your heart when you meet someone who will become important in your life. That sinking feeling in your stomach when you're about to make a mistake. That surge of energy when you're moving in the right direction. It speaks through your emotions. That immediate like or dislike of someone before you know why. That feeling of rightness or wrongness about a decision. That sense of excitement or dread about future events.
That emotional response that seems to come from nowhere but carries important information. It speaks through your mind. Those sudden insights that seem to come from nowhere. Those moments when you suddenly understand something you've been struggling with. Those times when the perfect solution to a problem simply appears in your consciousness. Those flashes of knowing that cut through confusion and doubt. And it speaks through what Jung calls synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to carry messages or guidance. When you've been thinking about someone and they call, when you keep seeing the same numbers or symbols, when books fall open to exactly the page you need to read, when you overhear a conversation that contains the exact information you've been seeking, your psyche is trying to tell you something through all of these channels. It's trying to guide you toward your authentic path, toward relationships that serve your growth, toward decisions that align with your deepest values. But you've been trained to dismiss these signals as coincidence, imagination, or wishful thinking. The unconscious mind operates according to different principles than the conscious, rational mind. It doesn't think in linear, logical sequences. It thinks in patterns, symbols, and emotional resonances. It doesn't separate past, present, and future the way conscious awareness does. It sees the threads that connect events across time. It recognizes patterns that repeat in your life. It knows things that haven't happened yet because it can see the trajectory you're on. This is why your dreams sometimes seem to predict future events. It's not supernatural. It's your unconscious mind's ability to see patterns and trajectories that your conscious mind hasn't noticed yet. It's why you sometimes know things about people before they tell you. Your unconscious mind is reading energy patterns, emotional states, and behavioral cues that your conscious awareness hasn't registered. Jung called this capacity prospective thinking, the ability to see where current patterns are leading. Your unconscious mind is constantly engaged in this prospective thinking, and it communicates its findings to your conscious awareness through intuitive insights, gut feelings, and sudden knowings. But here's what most people don't understand. You don't have to choose between rational thinking and intuitive knowing. You don't have to abandon logic to trust your gut. The goal isn't to replace analytical thinking with intuitive awareness. It's to integrate them, to develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold both rational and intuitive perspectives in conscious awareness and allow them to inform each other. When you can do this, your decision-making becomes exponentially more effective. Your rational mind can analyze the facts, consider the options, and evaluate the logical consequences. Your intuitive mind can sense the emotional undercurrents, feel into the rightness or wrongness of different choices, and perceive patterns that logic alone can't see. Together, they give you access to a much fuller picture of any situation. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating all aspects of your psyche. It's not about becoming more spiritual or mystical. It's about becoming more complete, more balanced, more fully yourself. It's about reclaiming all of your natural capacities instead of limiting yourself to just the ones that culture has deemed acceptable. Your intuition has been waiting for you to remember it. It's been trying to get your attention through physical sensations, emotional responses, dreams and synchronicities. It's been guiding you toward your authentic path, even when you haven't been consciously listening. And right now, as you're hearing these words, it's responding. It's saying, yes, this is what I've been trying to tell you. Notice how your body feels right now. Notice if there's a sense of recognition, of coming home to something you've always known, but perhaps forgotten. Notice if there's a part of you that feels relief. Relief that you're not crazy for having these experiences. Relief
that there's a name for this capacity, relief that you can trust what you've been sensing all along. This is just the beginning. Because once you recognize that your intuitive capacity is real, natural, and trustworthy, everything changes. You begin to notice how it's been operating in your life all along. You start to pay attention to the subtle signals instead of dismissing them. You begin to experiment with trusting your gut feelings and seeing what happens. And here's what you discover. Your unconscious mind has been trying to protect you, guide you, and help you grow your entire life. It's been working tirelessly on your behalf, processing information, recognizing patterns, and offering guidance through the only channels available to it. It's been your most loyal ally, even when you haven't been listening. But the deeper truth is this: your rational mind and your intuitive mind are not enemies. They're not competing for control of your life. They're designed to work together, to complement each other, to give you access to the fullest possible understanding of any situation. Your thinking mind is brilliant at analysis, planning, and logical problem solving. Your intuitive mind is brilliant at pattern recognition, emotional intelligence, and seeing the bigger picture. When you learn to honor both, when you develop the capacity to think and feel and sense and intuit simultaneously, you become incredibly powerful. Not powerful in a dominating way, but powerful in your ability to navigate life with wisdom, authenticity, and grace. You become someone who can make decisions that honor both practical realities and deeper truths. Someone who can read situations accurately and respond appropriately. Someone who can trust themselves completely. This is what Jung called psychological wholeness. Not perfection, but completeness. Not having all the answers, but having access to all of your ways of knowing. Not being without doubt or uncertainty, but being able to move forward with confidence even in the presence of uncertainty. Your intuition isn't asking you to abandon your critical thinking skills. It's asking you to expand beyond them. It's asking you to become more than just a rational being. It's asking you to become a fully integrated human being who can access all forms of intelligence: intellectual, emotional, physical, and intuitive. And here's the most profound truth of all: you already are this integrated being. You already have access to all of these capacities. You always have. You've just been trained to use only some of them and ignore the others. But the others never went away. They've been waiting patiently for you to remember them. Your unconscious mind has been holding space for your wholeness, even when your conscious mind forgot about it. It's been maintaining your connection to your intuitive wisdom, even when you stopped listening. It's been protecting your authentic self, even when you were busy being who you thought you should be. And now, something is shifting. You're remembering, you're recognizing, you're beginning to trust again. This isn't just about developing your intuition. It's about coming home to yourself. It's about reclaiming all of who you are, instead of limiting yourself to just the parts that feel safe or acceptable. But here's what Jung also understood. This recognition is just the beginning, because once you acknowledge that your intuitive capacity is real and valuable, you have to face the deeper question: why did you stop trusting it in the first place? What happened to convince you that your inner knowing wasn't reliable? What forces in your life, your family, your culture taught you to dismiss your own wisdom? This is where the real transformation begins. This is where you start to understand not just how intuition works, but why you learn to ignore it. This is where you begin to see the deeper patterns that have been shaping your life without your conscious awareness. This is where you start to reclaim not just your intuitive capacity, but your right to trust yourself completely. Because the truth is, your intuition was never the problem. Your intuition was never unreliable or untrustworthy. What happened was that you learned to doubt it. You learned to question it.
You learn to override it with rational explanations and logical arguments, and in doing so, you learn to doubt yourself at the deepest level. But that doubt isn't serving you anymore. That self-questioning isn't protecting you. That habit of dismissing your own knowing is actually limiting your capacity to live authentically and make decisions that truly serve your growth and happiness. Your unconscious mind is ready to show you something even more profound now. It's ready to reveal not just how your intuition works, but how you learn to mistrust it. It's ready to help you understand the deeper psychological patterns that have been running your life from the shadows. It's ready to guide you toward a level of self-trust and authentic living that you may never have imagined possible. Are you ready to see what your unconscious mind has been trying to show you? Are you ready to understand why you learn to doubt your own wisdom? Are you ready to discover what becomes possible when you stop fighting against your own inner knowing and start working with it instead? Because what Jung understood about the human psyche goes far deeper than just recognizing intuitive capacity. He understood that there are parts of ourselves we've learned to reject, to hide, to pretend don't exist. And these rejected parts don't just disappear, they continue to influence our lives from the unconscious, creating patterns we don't understand and limitations we can't see. But when we're ready to face these hidden aspects of ourselves, when we're ready to integrate what we've rejected, something extraordinary happens. We don't just become more intuitive, we become more whole. We don't just learn to trust our gut, we learn to trust ourselves completely. We don't just develop our inner knowing, we reclaim our authentic power. This is the deeper invitation your unconscious mind is extending to you right now. This is the profound transformation that becomes possible when you stop running from your own depth and start embracing it instead. So why did you learn to distrust the very wisdom that was designed to guide you? What happened in your life that convinced you to override your body's signals, dismiss your gut feelings, and question your own knowing? The answer lies in understanding what Carl Jung called the shadow and how your rational mind became not just a tool for analysis, but a prison that keeps you disconnected from your authentic self. Think about the last time you made a decision that looked perfect on paper, but felt completely wrong in your body. Maybe it was accepting a job that had all the right qualifications, salary and benefits, but something in your gut kept saying no. Or choosing a partner who checked all your logical boxes, stable, attractive, successful, but you never felt that spark of genuine connection. Or moving to a city that made practical sense, but left you feeling empty and displaced. What did you do with that uncomfortable feeling? Most of you did exactly what you were trained to do. You created a list of pros and cons. You analyzed the situation rationally. You told yourself that feelings aren't facts, that you needed to be practical, that you were being too emotional or too picky. You used your thinking mind to override your intuitive knowing, and you convinced yourself this was mature, responsible, adult behavior. But here's what really happened. You used your rational mind to betray yourself. You took the part of you that was designed to analyze and evaluate, and you turned it into a weapon against your own inner wisdom. You made your thinking function not just dominant, but tyrannical. And in doing so, you created what Jung recognized as a fundamental split in your psyche. Jung understood that every psychological function, when it becomes too dominant, eventually becomes pathological. When thinking becomes the only acceptable way of processing reality, it doesn't just grow stronger, it becomes rigid, controlling, and cut off from the other sources of intelligence that make you fully human. It becomes what he called a thinking complex,
an autonomous pattern that operates independently of your conscious will and actually works against your best interests. Notice how this shows up in your life. How many times have you talked yourself out of something that felt right? How often have you created elaborate rational justifications for staying in situations that were clearly wrong for you? How frequently do you find yourself paralyzed by analysis, creating endless lists and considerations, while the obvious answer sits right there in your body, waiting to be acknowledged? This is your rational mind running amok. This is what happens when thinking becomes detached from feeling, sensation, and intuition. It doesn't become more intelligent, it becomes more neurotic. It doesn't solve problems more effectively, it creates problems where none existed. It doesn't make you more successful, it makes you more anxious, more disconnected, and more likely to make decisions that serve your ego rather than your authentic self. But here's the deeper truth that Jung uncovered: when you reject any part of your natural psychological makeup, that rejected part doesn't disappear. It goes into what he called the shadow, the unconscious repository of everything you've learned to disown about yourself. And from the shadow, these rejected aspects continue to influence your life in ways you don't recognize or understand. Your rejected intuitive nature becomes shadow material. Your dismissed emotional intelligence becomes shadow material. Your ignored body wisdom becomes shadow material. And all of this disowned intelligence starts operating from the unconscious, creating symptoms, patterns, and behaviors that seem to come from nowhere, but actually represent your psyche's attempt to restore balance.
This is why you feel anxious when you're living too much in your head. This is why you get physically ill when you ignore your body's signals for too long. This is why you feel depressed when you're cut off from your emotional truth. This is why you experience that sense of emptiness or meaninglessness when you're operating purely from rational considerations without any connection to your deeper purpose or passion. Your unconscious mind is literally rebelling against the tyranny of purely rational living. It's creating symptoms to get your attention. It's generating anxiety to force you to pay attention to what you're ignoring. It's producing physical illness to make you slow down and listen to your body. It's creating relationship problems to highlight the areas where you're being inauthentic or living from shoulds rather than genuine desire. Jung called this the return of the repressed. What you push into the unconscious doesn't stay there quietly. It comes back through your dreams, your symptoms, your relationship patterns, your repetitive mistakes, and your inexplicable emotional reactions. It comes back through what you judge in other people, what triggers you unexpectedly, and what you find yourself repeatedly attracted to or repelled by. Pay attention to what irritates you most in other people. That person who seems too emotional, too sensitive, too intuitive, too focused on feelings rather than facts. That's often your own disowned emotional and intuitive nature being projected onto someone else. That colleague who makes decisions based on gut feelings rather than careful analysis, who seems to trust their instincts more than data, that triggers you because it represents the part of yourself you've learned to reject. Jung understood that we don't actually hate in others what's foreign to us. We hate in others what reminds us of disowned aspects of ourselves. Your strongest reactions to other people are almost always mirrors, showing you something about your own psychological makeup that you haven't yet integrated. This is why you might find yourself attracted to people who seem mysterious, intuitive, or emotionally expressive, while simultaneously being frustrated by their irrational behavior. Part of you is drawn to what they represent, the aspects of yourself you've cut off from, but another part of you judges and criticizes them because accepting their way of being would mean acknowledging that your purely rational approach to life is incomplete. The same dynamic plays out in your relationship with your own inner experience. When you have a gut feeling about something, notice what happens next. Usually your rational mind immediately starts analyzing, questioning, and finding reasons why that feeling might be wrong. I don't have enough information. I'm probably just projecting. I should think about this more logically. I need to be more objective. But here's what's really happening. Your thinking function has become not just a tool for analysis, but a defense against uncertainty, vulnerability, and the full complexity of human experience. You use rational analysis not to understand situations more clearly, but to avoid feeling the discomfort of not knowing, of having to trust something other than your mental control. This creates what Jung called psychological inflation, when one function becomes so dominant that it believes it can handle everything. Your thinking mind starts to believe it can analyze its way out of any situation, figure out the right answer to every question, and control outcomes through pure mental effort. But life is far more complex, mysterious, and unpredictable than your rational mind can possibly comprehend on its own. When you try to live entirely through thinking, you inevitably end up frustrated, anxious, and exhausted. You find yourself overthinking every decision, second-guessing every choice, and feeling like you never have enough information to move forward with confidence. You get stuck in analysis paralysis, spinning in mental loops that generate more confusion rather than clarity. Meanwhile, your body is trying to tell you something. Your emotions are trying to communicate important information. Your intuitive mind is offering guidance that could cut through all the mental complexity in an instant. But you've learned to treat these other sources of intelligence as unreliable, unprofessional, or simply irrelevant. This is the shadow of rational thinking. It becomes not a complement to your other capacities, but a replacement for them. It becomes not a way of understanding the world more fully, but a way of avoiding aspects of experience that feel too uncertain or vulnerable to tolerate. Jung recognized that this psychological split doesn't just affect individuals, it affects entire cultures. We live in a civilization that has elevated rational thinking to the level of a religion, while systematically devaluing emotional intelligence, body wisdom, and intuitive knowing. We've created educational systems that train people to analyze and memorize, but not to feel or sense or trust their inner guidance. We've built economic structures that reward people for being logical and objective while punishing them for being too sensitive or intuitive. And then we wonder why so many people feel disconnected, anxious, and lost. We wonder why depression and anxiety rates keep climbing despite all our technological and scientific advances. We wonder why people feel like something essential is missing from their lives, even when they have everything they thought they wanted. The answer is that we've created a culture of psychological imbalance. We've systematically cut ourselves off from 3/4 of our natural intelligence. We've learned to live as thinking machines rather than integrated human beings, and our unconscious minds are rebelling against this limitation through every symptom and struggle we experience. But here's what Jung also understood. This rebellion is not pathological. It's not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's actually a sign that something is right with you. Your unconscious mind is trying to restore balance. Your psyche is trying to guide you back toward wholeness. Your symptoms and struggles are not random. They're communications from the parts of yourself that have been neglected or rejected. When you can't stop thinking, when your mind races with worries and analyses, that's not just anxiety. That's your thinking function trying to do work that requires your whole being. When you feel empty or meaningless despite external success, that's not depression. That's your soul telling you that purely rational living isn't enough.
When you keep making the same mistakes in relationships or career choices, that's not failure, that's patterns trying to show you where you're operating from limited awareness rather than integrated wisdom. Your unconscious mind is actually trying to help you become more than just a rational being. It's trying to guide you toward what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a complete, integrated person who has access to all forms of intelligence and can respond to life's complexity with appropriate nuance and wisdom. But this process requires something that your rational mind finds terrifying: surrender. Not surrender in the sense of giving up or becoming passive, but surrender in the sense of acknowledging that your thinking mind, no matter how brilliant, cannot and should not try to control every aspect of your experience. Individuation requires what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold conscious awareness while allowing unconscious material to emerge and inform your understanding. It requires learning to think and feel simultaneously, to analyze and intuit at the same time, to plan rationally while remaining open to unexpected possibilities and guidance. This feels dangerous to your rational mind because it means giving up the illusion of control. It means acknowledging that you don't have to understand everything before you can act. It means trusting that your body, emotions, and intuitive insights carry intelligence that your thinking mind needs rather than information it should dismiss.
Most people resist this integration because it requires them to acknowledge how much energy they've been wasting trying to figure out things that their deeper wisdom already knows. It requires admitting that many of their most careful, logical decisions have actually been attempts to avoid feeling uncertain, vulnerable, or dependent on something other than mental control. But when you begin to allow this integration, something extraordinary happens. Your thinking becomes clearer because it's not trying to do work it wasn't designed for. Your emotions become more trustworthy because you're not dismissing them as irrational. Your body becomes a reliable source of guidance because you're actually paying attention to its signals. Your intuitive insights become more accessible because you're not immediately analyzing them away. You start to experience what Jung called psychological wholeness, not perfection, but completeness. Not having all the answers, but having access to all the ways of knowing that are available to human consciousness. Not being without uncertainty, but being able to navigate uncertainty with confidence because you trust your capacity to respond appropriately to whatever emerges. This is what becomes possible when you stop using your rational mind as a defense against the full spectrum of human experience and start using it as one element in a much larger symphony of intelligence. This is what happens when you reclaim the aspects of yourself that have been operating from the shadow and integrate them into conscious awareness. But this integration process isn't automatic. It requires what Jung called active imagination, the conscious practice of engaging with unconscious material instead of dismissing it. It requires learning to pay attention to your dreams, your body sensations, your emotional responses, and your intuitive insights with the same respect you give to your rational thoughts. It requires developing what he called psychological courage, the willingness to face aspects of yourself that you've been avoiding, to acknowledge patterns you've been denying, and to trust capacities you've been taught to dismiss. It requires being willing to look at how your over-reliance on rational thinking might actually be a sophisticated form of self-abandonment. Notice what's happening in your body right now as you hear these words. Notice if there's a part of you that feels relief at the possibility of not having to figure everything out with your mind alone. Notice if there's also a part of you that feels scared at the thought of trusting something other than rational analysis. Both responses are completely normal. The relief comes from the part of you that has been exhausted by trying to think your way through life's complexity. The fear comes from the part of you that has learned to equate rational control with safety and survival. But here's what Jung discovered through decades of working with people in this integration process. The fear of trusting your non-rational intelligence is almost always much worse than the actual experience of learning to trust it. The anxiety about making mistakes without careful analysis is usually far more distressing than any mistakes you might actually make by including your body, wisdom, emotional intelligence, and intuitive knowing in your decision-making process. In fact, when you learn to integrate all your forms of intelligence, you make far fewer mistakes, not because you become infallible, but because you're working with much more complete information. You're not just analyzing external facts, you're also reading energy patterns, emotional undercurrents, and intuitive insights about timing, appropriateness, and deeper implications. Your rational mind becomes more effective, not less, when it's working in collaboration with your other capacities rather than trying to dominate them. Your thinking becomes clearer when it's not clouded by the anxiety of trying to control outcomes through mental effort alone. Your analysis becomes more accurate when it includes information from your body's wisdom and your emotional intelligence. This is what Jung meant by the transcendent function, not the replacement of rational thinking, but its elevation through integration with the other aspects of human intelligence. This is what creates the kind of wisdom that can navigate complexity with grace, uncertainty with confidence, and change with appropriate responsiveness. But to access this integrated intelligence, you have to be willing to face the shadow of your rational mind. You have to acknowledge how your over-reliance on thinking has actually limited your effectiveness rather than enhancing it. You have to recognize how your attempts to control outcomes through analysis have often created more problems than they've solved. And you have to be willing to experiment with a different way of being, one that includes your rational capacity but doesn't worship it, one that values your thinking ability but doesn't make it the sole authority in your life, one that uses analysis as a tool rather than treating it as an identity. This is where the real transformation begins. This is where you start to become not just a thinking person, but a complete person. This is where you begin to access the kind of integrated intelligence that can respond to life's complexity with wisdom, authenticity, and appropriate power. Are you ready to see what becomes possible when you stop fighting against your own wholeness? Are you ready to experience what happens when you integrate the shadow aspects of your rational mind instead of continuing to be controlled by them? Are you ready to learn what Jung discovered about the extraordinary intelligence that emerges when thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition work together in conscious harmony? Because what you're about to understand will change not just how you make decisions, but how you experience yourself in the world. It will shift not just your relationship to your own intelligence, but your capacity to live authentically, love genuinely, and contribute meaningfully to the world around you. The integration you're moving toward isn't just psychological healing, it's the foundation for a completely different way of being human. What does it actually feel like to live from integrated intelligence? What happens when you stop being controlled by the shadow of your rational mind and start operating from the wholeness Jung called your authentic self? Right now, think about a time when you made a decision that felt completely right, when your thinking, feeling, body wisdom, and intuitive knowing all aligned. How did that feel different from the decisions you made purely from analysis or social expectation? Most of you just remembered something. A moment when you knew exactly what to do without having to figure it out. A choice that felt obvious even though it might have looked risky or unconventional to others. A time when you moved from your center rather than from your fears, shoulds, or other people's expectations. That feeling, that sense of alignment, clarity, and authentic power,
That's what becomes available when you integrate all aspects of your psychological makeup. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. Living from your center isn't a destination you reach. It's a way of being you practice.
It's not about achieving some permanent state of enlightenment or psychological perfection. It's about moment-by-moment awareness of what's actually true for you right now, and the courage to honor that truth even when it's inconvenient or challenging. This requires what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you think you should be. And individuation always begins with recognizing the difference between your persona and your authentic self. Your persona is the mask you wear to navigate social expectations. It's the version of yourself you present at work, in your family, in social situations. There's nothing wrong with having a persona. It's a necessary part of functioning in the world. The problem comes when you forget that it's a mask and start believing that this adapted, socially acceptable version of yourself is who you really are. Your authentic self is something much more primal and powerful. It's the part of you that existed before you learned to be nice, appropriate, or acceptable. It's the part of you that knows what you actually want, not what you think you should want. It's the part of you that responds to life from genuine feeling rather than calculated strategy. It's the part of you that your intuition is always trying to guide you back toward. When you're living from your persona, decision-making feels heavy and complicated. You have to consider what other people will think, what's expected of you, what's safe or practical or socially acceptable. You find yourself exhausted from constantly monitoring and adjusting your behavior to fit external expectations. But when you're connected to your authentic self, decision-making becomes much simpler. Not easier necessarily, but simpler. You can feel what's right for you. You can sense what serves your growth and what doesn't. You can distinguish between opportunities that genuinely excite you and opportunities that just look good on paper. This is where your integrated intelligence becomes practical. Your thinking mind can evaluate the logistics and consequences of different choices. Your emotional intelligence can assess whether something feels genuinely aligned with your values and desires. Your body can sense whether a situation feels safe, energizing, or draining. Your intuitive knowing can perceive patterns, timing, and possibilities that aren't immediately obvious. When all four of these ways of knowing are working together, you develop what Jung called psychological discrimination, the ability to sense what belongs to you and what doesn't, what serves your authentic development and what serves only your ego or other people's expectations. Notice how this shows up in your relationships. When you're operating from your persona, you often find yourself in relationships that look good from the outside, but don't actually nourish you. You might be with someone who checks all the right boxes, attractive, successful, well-regarded, but something essential is missing. The connection feels forced or performative rather than natural and energizing. But when you're connected to your authentic self, you're attracted to people who resonate with who you actually are, rather than who you're trying to be. You find yourself drawn to qualities like authenticity, depth, emotional availability, and genuine compatibility, rather than just social status or superficial attractiveness. This doesn't mean you become selfish or inconsiderate. It means you become more genuinely generous because you're giving from fullness rather than depletion. You become more trustworthy because you're being honest about who you are and what you can offer. You become more attractive to the right people because you're not trying to be someone you're not. The same principle applies to your work and creative expression. When you're operating from your persona, you often find yourself in careers that look impressive but don't actually engage your authentic interests and abilities.
You might be successful by external measures, but feel empty or restless because you're not expressing your true nature. But when you're connected to your authentic self, you're naturally drawn toward work that allows you to express your genuine gifts and interests. You find ways to contribute that feel energizing rather than draining. You develop what Jung called a personal myth, a sense of meaning and purpose that emerges from your unique psychological makeup rather than from external expectations or social programming. This is where your intuitive capacity becomes especially valuable. Your rational mind can analyze career options based on salary, security, and advancement opportunities. But your intuitive knowing can sense which opportunities will actually allow you to grow, contribute, and express your authentic nature. It can perceive possibilities that aren't immediately obvious and timing that your analytical mind might miss. Jung understood that everyone has what he called a personal diamond, a unique combination of gifts, interests, and life purpose that seeks expression through their individual existence. But most people never fully connect with their diamond because they're too busy trying to meet external expectations or avoid social disapproval. Your diamond speaks through your intuition. It's the source of those persistent interests that don't seem to make logical sense. It's behind those career fantasies you dismiss as impractical. It's the energy that gets activated when you encounter certain ideas, people, or possibilities. It's what makes you feel most alive and authentic. When you learn to recognize and follow your diamond, your life begins to have a quality that Jung called meaningfulness. Not happiness necessarily, though that often follows, but a sense that your existence has significance, that you're participating in something larger than your personal comfort or success. This is where the collective unconscious becomes relevant to your personal development. Jung recognized that individual psychological development isn't just about personal fulfillment. It's about contributing to the evolution of human consciousness. When you become more integrated, more authentic, more whole, you're not just healing yourself, you're contributing to the healing of the collective shadow that affects all of humanity. But this level of authentic living requires what Jung called psychological courage. It requires being willing to disappoint people who expect you to remain small, safe, or conventional. It requires being willing to make choices that serve your authentic development, even when they don't serve your ego's desire for security or approval. Most people resist this level of authenticity because it feels dangerous. What if you trust your intuition and make a mistake? What if you follow your genuine interests and end up financially insecure? What if you stop being who others expect you to be and they reject you? These fears are understandable, but Jung discovered something important. The risks of living authentically are almost always smaller than the risks of living inauthentically. When you're constantly trying to be someone you're not, you're living in a state of chronic stress that eventually manifests as physical illness, emotional dysfunction, or spiritual emptiness. When you're living from your authentic center, you have access to much more energy, creativity, and resilience. You make better decisions because you're working with complete information rather than just rational analysis. You're more attractive to the right people and opportunities because you're being genuine rather than performing. You're more effective in whatever you do because you're aligned with your natural gifts and interests. But the transition from persona-based living to authentic living isn't instant. It's a gradual process of learning to recognize what's true for you in each moment and developing the courage to honor that truth even when it's inconvenient. This is where practical integration becomes essential. You need to develop what Jung called conscious relationship with your unconscious mind.
This means paying attention to your dreams, your body sensations, your emotional responses, and your intuitive insights with the same respect you give to your rational thoughts.
Start noticing how your body responds to different people, situations, and opportunities. Does your energy expand or contract? Do you feel more alive or more depleted? Does your breathing deepen or become shallow? Your body is constantly giving you information about what serves your authentic development and what doesn't. Pay attention to your emotional responses, especially the ones that seem to come from nowhere. That sudden feeling of excitement when someone mentions a particular opportunity, that inexplicable sense of dread about a situation that looks perfectly fine logically, that feeling of resonance when you encounter certain ideas or people. These emotional responses carry intelligence that your rational mind needs. Begin working with your dreams as a source of guidance and insight. Your unconscious mind processes information differently than your conscious awareness, and dreams often contain solutions to problems you've been struggling with, insights about people and situations you haven't consciously recognized, and guidance about directions you should consider exploring. Most importantly, start experimenting with trusting your intuitive insights in low-risk situations. When you have a hunch about which route to take to work, follow it and see what happens. When you feel drawn to call someone, make the call. When you sense that a particular book or workshop might be valuable, explore it. Build confidence in your intuitive capacity through small experiments before applying it to major life decisions. But here's what Jung also understood. This integration process doesn't happen in isolation. You need what he called conscious relationship, not just with your own unconscious, but with other people who are engaged in their own individuation process. You need community with others who understand the value of authentic living and can support you in staying true to yourself, even when it's challenging. This is where the quality of your relationships becomes crucial. When you're surrounded by people who are primarily invested in maintaining their personas, who are threatened by authenticity or change, who need you to remain small or conventional to feel safe themselves, it becomes much harder to live from your authentic center. But when you're in relationship with people who are committed to their own growth and authenticity, who can witness and support your individuation process without trying to control or diminish it, your capacity to live from your center is greatly enhanced. These relationships don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be without conflict or challenge, but they do need to be based on mutual respect for each person's individuation process rather than mutual commitment to maintaining comfortable illusions or avoiding difficult truths.